don't know. Most women, I think, have some form of insecurity concerning their bodies. Lots of women don't like to be seen naked. Lots of women don't like to get dressed or undressed in front of their husbands. And how do you, if let's say a woman does have extra weight, she doesn't feel fit, she doesn't feel like she looks good, how do you think that women can overcome some of these insecurities in their marriage? Hey, what's up, YouTube fam? It's Dana Shea, marriage and relationship coach at Real Relationship Talk, and welcome to our video edition of our podcast. So, this is our vodcast, you guys, and we are going to just jump straight in today with some amazing content. I have for us today special guest Molly Moses. Now, Molly is a fitness coach. She is a blogger. She talks about marriage and relationships, and we had an amazing conversation about some of the lies that women believe about sex. And so listen, maybe you're a guy and you stumbled across this video. I want you to stay tuned because you need to know some of these lies that are going on in these women's heads. Some of them may have been caused by you guys and some of them maybe not. So if you're a woman, I want you to interact with this video. You know that many women face insecurities, especially when it comes to our bodies, what we look like, pleasing our husbands, all of those things. And so we've got just a jam-packed interview for you today. You're going to find so much value. You're going to want to go and find Molly. You can find her on her website. All the links are going to be in the description in the bottom of this video. So let's just jump right in, you guys, to this great conversation that I was able to have with Molly Moses. All right. So again, Molly, thank you so much for being here today on the podcast. I'm super excited to have this conversation. Even as we were talking, kind of pre-production, pre-recording, we have so much in common as far as just really wanting to help women, women of color especially, come into the freedom that has been really, I think, just kind of hidden from us for such a while. So why don't you just kind of let everyone know a little bit about yourself? And I know that you're into fitness and family and you kind of interweave these things. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and your passion points.
Absolutely. So I am a wife. And first, let me say thank you. Thank you, Dana. I'm so excited to be here and how we met so quickly. I'm just grateful for godly connection. So thank you. Absolutely. And I'm excited to talk about these topics as well. So yes, I am a wife and a mother of two. I have a 7-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. And so life is a little crazy sometimes, but yes, I absolutely love being their mom and being a wife. I'm also a ordained elder through God's Way Ministries. I'm a PK. My dad is a pastor, so that is also contributes to the narrative of my life. I grew up in the church, so being a PK and everything that comes with that has definitely shaped my life drastically. But yes, I did not, I guess I could say I ran from the call. I definitely did not see myself becoming an ordained elder. I'm a praise dancer as well. So I thought that was going to be my thing. I've been dancing since I was 8. And the Lord really moved on my heart through that and through choreography. So I thought that, okay, I'll do that for the church. But then when God was calling me to speak and to write, those things took a turn also. So I ran for a little bit, but I did answer the call. I'm also a passionate marketer. I went to school for marketing and communications. So I won't say I'm retired from the corporate world, but in 2019, I did resign. I was a chief communications officer for the state of Ohio, a very rigorous, fast-paced job, and I loved every second of it. But my husband is a serial entrepreneur and a restaurateur, and at the time, his businesses were going really well, and he had 2 restaurants up and going and was working on a third before the pandemic hit. So he really needed my help with the business and more with the children. So I shifted out of that corporate role, but I still very much have a passion for corporate communications, for marketing, for media. That's kind of my education and corporate background.
I gotcha. Yeah. And it's funny how we met. We actually met on Clubhouse, which for those of you who are listening, you might be thinking, what is Clubhouse? Clubhouse is so great for podcasters. It's an audio social media network, pretty much is what it is. And we were in a marriage, I think it was a marriage focused group.
Yes.
Yeah. And we were just talking about relationships and you stepped out on the stage and you started talking. And I was like, I have got to get her on the podcast. so much of what you were saying really resonated with what I feel, and really the message that I'm trying to promote, which is that marriage, yes, marriage, I said this on last week's podcast, marriage is work. It is hard at times, but it's also
Mhm.
beautiful, and it's also
It is.
purposeful, and it's meant to be celebrated. And
Yes.
one of the things I know that you believe too, Molly, is that it's interesting. You're talking about being a PK and now still being an elder in the church, and so that we love the church, but the church has some issues sometimes, especially pertaining to this conversation around sex. And, I think that so often it's still this taboo subject. It makes people embarrassed. People don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And so you recently wrote a blog, and I forget what the title was, but it was basically all about like how the church has kind of like not really helped us in this area.
Hmm.
So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, why do you think that there's still so much shame or embarrassment concerning this whole topic around sex and marriage?
Yeah, I think it's a lot. And I will say that my experience is in the charismatic evangelical background. So I don't want to kind of paint too broad of a picture because from what I have read, some of the other denominations do have some resources that appear to be out there, maybe kind of take a more holistic approach to teaching about sex. But from a charismatic, evangelical, Pentecostal, apostolic background, even Baptist, there was just so much silence. It just wasn't talked about at all. So the blog kind of touches on how there's purity culture, which talks about, yeah, we don't have sex, and that's that.
Mhm.
Sex is for marriage. They don't really go into any further detail about it. And then also, it kind of just has this connotation that it's dirty, that it's wrong. And I know that is to kind of shy us away from fornication. We know that that is the idea to kind of save us from ourselves. But in an attempt to do that, it's just shrouded in so much, just like you said, shame. And it's just, it almost is like, yeah, we just don't go there.
Mhm.
So I really am passionate about breaking down some of those walls because we need to talk about it.
Right, right. And I think that in the church, like, what better place to talk about it? What better
Mhm.
place to teach? Because, if we are afraid to talk about it, and I'm thinking about even as parents, some people listening to this podcast might not have any kind of church background, but I think
Right.
those who I know personally who their parents never talked to them about sex, it was just
Mhm.
very much like we don't talk about that, or it was like, you don't do it. Like, I remember when I was in college, my one of my college friends said that her parents told her that if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant. And most people which she said, if you get pregnant, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant. And if you have a baby too young, you can die. Like, that's literally, that's,
Well, I've never heard that one.
like, no lie, like, that is what she was like 18 years old.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Thinking
Yeah.
like these crazy, and I don't know if her parents were joking with her, and
Right.
she literally believed it. And so that was all the information that she had. And so
Right.
here are these college girls being like, honey, no, 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 let me tell you. And so kind of bringing her up to speed, if you will. But, I know that you have young children,
Mhm.
and I know that, somebody might say, well, my goodness, they're only 4, they're only 7, they're too young. And I know that probably the 4-year-old is young, but have you had any conversations with your kids about sex yet?
Not about sex directly, so not about sexual relations. We have talked to both of them about body parts, anatomy,
Yes.
using real names. So a funny thing about my daughter is she loves to be naked. She just doesn't like clothes. And this is strange because none of the rest of us in my household are really like that. We don't really know where she gets it from, but we don't shame her for that.
Right.
We're at home, nobody cares. If you're not cold, you can be naked. So not we haven't really started to educate them about sex yet, but we have started the body acceptance speeches and just being free, being yourself and not being ashamed of your body parts. Why should we be?
Right.
So a healthy body image and self-awareness is what we're teaching right now.
That's so good. That's so important. I had one of my good friends. She's a sex therapist. She was on the podcast several episodes ago, and she's actually coming back for this series. And that was one of the biggest things that she said is when you're teaching your children about sex, tell them like the actual body parts. Don't
Mhm.
allow them to start being ashamed of their body parts.
Right.
And so yeah, I think even going back to kind of that conversation with the church, where like the modesty conversations, they
Mhm.
definitely have their place, but then
Right.
what it can do is it can also teach people, women especially, to then be ashamed of their body. Like, I have to
Mhm.
cover this up. This is somehow wrong or bad or sinful if you're well endowed in certain ways.
Right.
And so I think that's a lot of things that we kind of have to undo. Let me ask
Mhm.
you, Molly. So obviously you have these young children and you have a great marriage. How do you keep the sexy alive, if you will, in your marriage with young children?
Yeah, it's not always easy, but we make it a priority. I tell my mentees all the time, priorities are not what you say they are, they're what you show they are. So we
Mhm.
can say that sex and intimacy is a top priority in our marriage. We can say that all the time, but if we're not showing it, then it's going to fall by the wayside. So I think it's super important to plan sex. Like, it sounds weird to do, to plan intimacy. But if we think back how many times we've spontaneously sparked something in the past few months, it's probably not that often, especially when you have young kids. So planning it, sending texts and saying, hey, what's up tonight? Stuff like that, like making it not taboo. We
Yeah.
are husband and wife. This is a union. We are best friends. We should be able to talk about this. And it was hard for me early in my marriage. I will say that because of how I grew up, I wasn't comfortable having these kind of open conversations with my husband. But then I realized if we're not having them, then it's not a priority. So doing some very real practical things like planning, like date nights. I'm a very independent and strong-willed person, so I don't really like to ask for help. But every now and then, I need to ask my mom and my sister to keep the kids so we can have a date night and have some fun.
Yeah.
So it's practical steps that are going to get you there.
Yeah, I love how the intentionality behind it. We just did an episode, episode 22, about maintenance sex, and that was one of the biggest things that I was stressing is
Ah,
have to make it a priority, and you can't
mhm.
just, like you said, you can't just say it. You have to either put it on that calendar or
Yep.
somehow schedule what, some people have this thing like, well, scheduled sex isn't spontaneous, it's not as fun and all of that, and that's fine. Like, people have different opinions, but at
Mhm.
the end of the day, as long as it's a priority because you make it so. and
Right.
and yeah, asking for help. I am a mentor mom for a group called MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers. I've been involved with that ministry for a long time, and that
Mhm.
is probably one of the biggest things that these young moms have little teenies. They have infants,
Yeah. Yeah.
1 year olds and 2 year olds, and it's just like, how, first of all, when you've got babies pulling on you all day,
Yeah.
growing up on you, and I mean,
Yep.
you don't feel very sexy, you don't feel very
Right.
comfortable. And so there is that season of life, I think, where you just kind of have to like have mind over matter. You
Yep.
have to like tell yourself, I am beautiful, even with my extra 15 to 20 pounds of baby
Right.
fat that's still on me. I am beautiful, even though I feel like, I feel like I look like, crap or whatever.
Right. Right.
But I think it's also taking that extra step and doing things that make you feel beautiful too.
Yes.
Like, take a shower every day. I'm huge. Like, I'm telling these moms, like, you should not be going 3 and 4 days, ladies. Come on.
No,
Like,
no, no. I know it's not easy because so our son was not a sleeper, still is not a sleeper. He gets up in the middle of the night, even at 7 years old.
mm,
But when he was an infant, we really struggled because he didn't even nap. So there was an underlying health condition. He had really bad acid reflux and GERD. So he got put on medication for that. But he would not sleep during the daytime for longer than 30 minutes. It was like clockwork. I would put him down for a nap in 30 minutes. So I had trouble taking a shower and finding times to do things, to do something to my hair, to do something to my face. But we cannot neglect that. Self care is hard to find and hard to implement when they're infants, but you will really lose your sanity if you don't. So
yeah.
yeah, even when it's not easy, we gotta find ways to do that, even if it's just, hey, I need an hour so I can go to a nail appointment.
Right.
You
Right.
gotta do that.
Yeah, and it becomes this vicious cycle where if you're not taking just 15, 20 minutes. Like I tell the ladies, I'm like, you don't have to have your face all glammed up, but do something. If lip gloss makes you feel pretty, put on lip gloss. If
Yeah.
throw on some eyelashes, they make the magnetic ones now,
Right.
5 minutes, pop it on, whatever it is, even if it's just combing your hair or brushing
Yep.
your hair, take off your scarf, put on some new sweatpants.
Yeah. Right.
Out, right? If you're gonna have
Right.
sweatpants on every day, change out the sweatpants. But because I
Exactly.
think if you don't, then what happens is then you start feeling like, you don't feel good about yourself. You
No.
feel like this washed out, old, like, and then
Yep.
your husband will pick up on that, and then
Yeah.
he might not be as interested. And because he's not interested, then that makes you feel worse. And so it's just this
Exactly.
whole cycle that
Yes.
could easily be solved by you putting that baby in that crib for 20 minutes and letting
Mhm.
him or her cry it out if they need
Yep.
to, so
Good
that you can take
thinking.
some time and kind of get yourself in a space where you feel
Absolutely.
like I can be presentable to my spouse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Super important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, especially for young marriages, because I think,
Yes.
men are visual creatures.
Yes, they are.
And so it's not to say that like men shouldn't also be taking care of themselves, because they absolutely should. But I think as women, we need to understand that, if your husband, I've said this before on other videos and podcasts, but if your husband is going to work every day with these, nicely dressed, nice smelling women who
Yep.
are about their business, and then he comes home and you've got throw up everywhere, and your same clothes from the past
Right.
4 days, like that's just a recipe for disaster.
It is. More often than not, it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit, Molly, about how do you incorporate like fitness and just taking care of your physical self? How has that proven to be a benefit for you in your marriage, especially in the sexual intimacy department?
Ooh, it's huge. It is absolutely huge. So I struggled and still do, if I'm completely honest, with having and maintaining a healthy body image.
Mhm.
I pick myself apart. And I just did a post about this on Instagram because I grew up as a dancer and I'm classically trained. So ballet, modern jazz, all of the disciplines that you're supposed to be stick thin for, or back in the day you were. So when I started to develop and I started to fill out, I started to detest my thighs, and I didn't want to butt like it. I didn't want that. And
Mhm.
so when I got into fitness, which wasn't until college, it really helped me to unpack and break down some of those unhealthy ways that I looked at myself. I feel more confident from the inside out when I work out. So that plays a huge role into when it comes into the bedroom, because early on in our marriage, I was like a lights off kind of, I don't really need you to see all of me until I'm laying down type of thing,
Mhm.
even though I was fit, but I
Mhm.
just I didn't have the self-confidence, and or even just not knowing. Even my blog piece talked about there was just so little education that I had that plays into insecurities too.
Mhm.
So being fit and being active really gives me inner self-confidence, which plays into me being able to initiate, me feeling comfortable, with certain things that my husband does and with certain things that he says. Because if you are uncomfortable with you, then other stuff, even that your husband says or does, will also make you feel uncomfortable. So fitness is huge. I make time for it every day. I know it's hard, but I try to tell busy moms, capitalize on your mornings, because if your kids are still asleep, that's the best time you are going to have. I work it in the morning because I know if I don't get it done in the morning, it's not happening. So I
That's
work it in the morning, but I know that if I go stretches for some reason that I am not active, I just don't feel as good about myself. So it definitely plays a huge role in how I feel about myself, and our marriage and our sex life. It's massive.
Yeah, I love, you touched on another word, insecurities. And that was something that I was going to ask you about too, because I feel like so many women, we do have so many insecurities in ourselves, and even if you are stick thin, like it amazes me that you see these like models and they're insecure and you're like, why? Like,
Right.
why do you, what do you have to be insecure about? But I
Right.
think, I don't know. Most women, I think, have some form of insecurity concerning their bodies. Lots of women don't like to be seen naked. Lots of women don't like to get dressed or undressed in front of their husbands. And how do you, if let's say a woman does have extra weight, she doesn't feel fit, she doesn't feel like she looks good, how do you think that women can overcome some of these insecurities in their marriage?
I think starting with the things you do like about yourself. I would hope that every woman has at least one or two things that she does love about her body. She may feel like it's small, but it could be her hair or her eyebrows or, her legs, whatever it is. Celebrate the things that you do love and find ways to accentuate those in your personal style and what you wear. And then work on the things that you don't like. One of my favorite blogs that I've written was talking about the negative of body positivity. So I feel like there's the body positive movement is amazing,
Mhm.
and I am so glad that we've gotten there. But it also kind of put this facade over things that we actually don't like about ourselves. And I think it's healthy to have things that you want to improve. If you want to improve those things, don't act like they don't exist. So those things that you genuinely are uncomfortable with, work on those things, and but have a healthy view of them. Know that you may never be a size 4 and be comfortable with that, but still work on what makes you feel comfortable. I have the kind of notion that you can have the body you want. You have to be willing to work on it. So whether, I know lots of people that desire to gain weight, so whether you want to gain weight or lose weight or tone up, those goals, accept those goals and work on them. So women who have weight they want to lose, I say first, celebrate those things you do love about yourself and accentuate those things. And then when we're talking about marriage, also ask your husband what his favorite parts of your body are. What do you like about me? I would have conversations with my husband and say, I'm really looking to change this. How would that make you feel? Or I point blank asked him, what's too thin for you? If I got this small, like, would you still be attracted? Or, having those kind of conversations that may be uncomfortable, can give us a lot of insight, because our spouses, we chose each other for a reason. So
Right.
just because you have these issues and don't like something about yourself, don't assume that your spouse doesn't. He might love that. There are men out there that love some extra extra. So just because it's something we look in the mirror and we're like, oh, it doesn't mean that they do that.
No, that's such a great point. I remember growing up, I went to a predominantly white school, and most now white girls these days have all kinds of stuff that they didn't used to have.
They're not.
I'm like, when did white girls start getting butts?
I
Because
say the same thing
the white girls of the 80s did not have big butts,
at
okay?
all. No.
So I always had like, a big butt like that. Hey, it's DNA. Like all the
Right.
women in my family, there's nothing I
Right.
can do about that. But because I went to school with all of these stick thin girls,
Yeah.
I had an insecurity about that, and so I would literally walk a different way to
Yeah.
to de
Yeah.
to like de-accentuate, if that's a
Right.
my derriere. And so I remember when my husband and I got together, like that is one of the favorite things about my body to him. And
Yep.
so him saying that to me, I was like, oh, like, okay, you like this. So then I became very proud about it. And now, like I said, now everybody, people listen, people are getting surgeries
Exactly.
to have what God gave me, naturally. So praise.
Exactly.
Um, but I think that's such a great point, because so many things that we feel ashamed about or insecure about, whether it be from what we've seen on TV, or maybe growing up, somebody pointed something out about our body that we didn't like or that they didn't like. And so then we stop liking it. But that might be the thing that our husbands love.
Absolutely.
One of my girlfriends, she says, she was like, getting older, it's harder to lose weight the older that you get. And so she was really insecure about, she calls it her fluffiness, right? And she's not
Mhm.
overweight. I mean, she's probably, all of us could probably lose a few, but she's not obese, overweight. She's not in
Mhm.
any danger. But her husband was like, I love how squishy you are. Like,
Mhm.
he said it makes him feel comfortable, like it's cozy. And
Yeah.
here she is, like thinking she needs to be this tough, rough, hardened bodybuilder, and
Right.
working so hard to get to that body where her husband actually loved just kind of her softness.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what? That's a really, really great point to ask your husband, what are
Mhm.
some things that you really love about my body? Because that
Yeah.
can actually help to absolve some of those insecurities.
It really can. And you, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be surprised with his answer. But those aren't conversations that we're having on the regular.
Exactly, exactly. So I want to know, I want to segue a little bit into talking about some of the lies. We talked about this on the last podcast that I did with the Lawrences. We talked about lies that we believed from the church. But I want to know, what are some lies that you feel like women have believed, maybe from the culture or maybe from our upbringing? Like, what do you think there are some lies, or let me rephrase that. What do you think are some lies that women are believing that are really holding us back from being truly free and in sexual intimacy with our husbands?
Whew, I think there's tons, but I think probably one of the biggest ones is that um, our desires come secondary. So, it's our responsibility to fulfill his needs first. And
Mhm.
then, if we fulfill our own desires, or if he chooses to do that, to go to journey with us through that, then okay. But I think one of the biggest lies is that that's our first priority and then everything else comes second. I do think that worldly society and culture has done a good job, especially in the last maybe 15 years, 10 to 15 years or so, of of painting the picture that it's okay for a woman to own her own sexuality. Now, as you said, there are probably people that are listening to this that are not ingrained in church culture. So, your level of acceptance with that and what you feel is appropriate is up to you. But you've got the Cardi B's and the Megs out there that are owning their sexuality and using that for profit, for lack of a better term. But it still plays into the larger narrative that we are sexual beings, and inside marriage we should be free to explore that. So we have been able to break down some of those walls, but it still is really, I think, just we've got to do more. We have to do more when it comes to actually exploring those things that are important to us, our passions, the things that we like. I just feel like one of the biggest lies is that that should come secondary and that women don't initiate. If your husband feels like having sex with you, then he'll initiate that, and you sit back and wait. Those are lies.
Yeah. And I think a lot of women are uncomfortable initiating. There's lots of
Yeah.
husbands that, I've been talking to, whether through coaching or through who reach out, through the podcast or whatever. And even my husband does a group for men, and they're all talking about, their wives don't really initiate, and men want their wives to initiate. But again, I think you're right. I think if you are a woman and you've not been taught to own your sexuality, and you don't have to wait for your husband to get in the mood. Like, if you're in the mood, honey, like, go for it.
Go for it.
I think that a lot of women still are not comfortable initiating. I think that a lot of women also get this confused, like, if I'm supposed to be free in my sexuality, how free can I be without them being raunchy? And I think I read something too on your website where you were like, I'm not crass, I'm not raunchy, pretty much. And I really appreciated you saying that, because that's a huge value of mine. I am completely open and transparent about talking about sex, but I think that there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
And when we begin to, like, the Bible talks about not allowing your marriage bed to be defiled. And
Mhm.
so I think when you start bringing in things that take away from the sexual intimacy between husband and wife, that's when it can be a little bit tricky. And that's when you can start to kind of get into some dangerous waters. But I think, there is a way to celebrate your sexuality, whether you're married or not, because even if you're not married, you're still a sexual being.
Right.
So I believe that there's a way to celebrate all of you and all of who God made you to be without turning into this raunchy, crass, over sexualized person. And
Yeah.
this is where, this is kind of the dividing line. If you are a Christian, if you call yourself a follower of Christ, like, you cannot be taking your cues from the world on this one,
Right. You really
because
can.
the world is going to tell you there, all bets are off. Do
Right.
whatever feels good, do whatever
Right.
looks good, do
Right.
whoever looks and feels good, and
Yeah.
have no shame about it. But we
Yeah.
operate on a different set of rules, if you will. We
Right.
operate on a different set of integrity, I should say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So have you seen, and I'm sure that you probably have, as far as in the church or people who you know are believers, kind of get that line blurred a little bit? And how would someone know? Like if there's someone listening right now and they're like, yeah, I'm a Christian and, I want to be proud of who I am as a sexual being, but how do I know when I've kind of crossed the line? What would you say to that?
Um, So, if you're a believer, I would hope that you have a relationship with Christ. So you're not just going to church and being preached to or being preached at, but you're actually having dialogue with God in your time. So you've got to have these conversations with God, and you've got to have personal standards. The Holy Spirit is a powerful thing, and it guides us. And I do think that people just are different. What convicts people is different. I'm not talking about sin overall. We all know that the sins that are in the Bible. I'm talking about, there are some people who can't listen to secular music. There are some things that vex people because of their relationship. So I think you've got to be very attentive to that and pay attention to that. And when the Holy Spirit is kind of trying to rein you in, don't go against that. So I think that is number one. And I think let's just use some common sense. If you are single, you should not, and I don't like to tell people what they should do, but it doesn't make sense when we are adopting worldly principles and engaging in fornication or condoning certain things that we know are not what the Bible says.
Mhm.
So I think we've got to practice some common sense, but that should not take away from us being able to learn. So singles who desire to be married, because I'm under the belief that not everybody should be married. I don't
Same.
know if everybody ascribes to that belief, but and Paul talked a lot about that in the Bible. Like he just didn't believe that marriage was for everybody. So
Right.
I really try to speak to singles who desire to be married, not blurring that line of trying to explore and find your sexuality as a single. It's about accepting that, but understanding that the exploration is reserved for the marriage.
That's it.
Learning, get your education about these things you don't know about. Maybe you weren't taught in school. You definitely weren't taught in church. So read and understand and start to know yourself, but then know that the practice of that is reserved for marriage.
That's such a good word, Molly. I think, again, going back to your thought about not everyone should be married, and that's so true. I think that that's kind of one of those other lies, if you will, that we've kind of picked up from the church is that everyone should be married. And so people feel like they're an incomplete human if they're
Mhm.
single. We're actually going to be doing this whole series coming up after this All About Sex series. We're doing a whole series for singles because I want singles to be free in their singleness. And if
Yeah,
God calls you to be married, great. If he
right,
doesn't, great. No,
right.
there's not like you're not a better person because you're married. As a matter of fact, marriage is gonna bring a lot of stuff out of you
Yes, it will.
that as my look at my single friends and I'm just like, you have no idea how good you have it sometimes. The
Yes, absolutely.
always looks greener on the other side, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but it's about being free to just fully embrace and accept yourself, and also like you said, getting in the word of God and finding out, like, it baffles me when I speak to like a group of Christians, and they have no idea what like God says about sexual ethics. Like,
Yeah,
how are we supposed to behave sexually? It's not in there.
right.
There's so many places in scripture where like this is blatantly obvious, and these are the things. And the thing I love about having a relationship, like you mentioned, with the Lord, is that when you have that relationship with the Lord, you realize that this is not just a set of rules. This is not just like God telling you can't do this, you can't enjoy, you can't have sex because it's wrong. But it's
Right.
like there's a reason behind that.
Yeah.
One of the biggest reasons I think is because when you look at how powerful sex is, this
Hmm.
is why it's so great in marriage, because it bonds you to another human like nothing else.
Yeah.
And so when you just go out here and you're starting to have sex with all these folks because they're cute or because you feel connected to them or because you want to try it out, you're literally bonding yourself to all of these different people. And you got
Absolutely.
these folks walking around wondering why they're so broken. And it's like
Hmm.
you've got pieces of you all over whatever city you live in.
Exactly. Exactly. And not only that, there is that, and soul ties are very real, and giving yourself to somebody just frivolously like that. There are several, we have case studies of why that is not good. But even when it comes to when those unions result in a child, what we have to understand is that it's so much more difficult to raise a child as a single parent. Not that it can't be done. People do it successfully, but that's not the way it was intended to be. And I'm not trying to speak against people who adopt children as single people. I'm not saying that single people can't raise children successfully, but when we have situations where young women have had a lot of frivolous sex and then end up with a child and they're very, very young, maybe a teenager or somebody young in their 20s, that is a really hard mountain to climb, to raise that child without a father, without the help that you needed. These things sound cliche, but they're really not. It takes a village,
Yes.
and when you don't have that support, it's just your life becomes extremely compounded. So going back to what you said about rules, and what seems to be restrictive is really for our own good.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm grateful for people like you. I'm grateful for people who are relevant in the culture, who believe in like looking your best and enjoying your marriage, and being sexy with your husband and having all these things, but that also have a standard of, okay, this is how we act, this is how we don't act.
Yeah.
If God forbid, something were to happen to either one of our husbands and we found ourselves single again, I'm like, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. Like, I'm willing to say, okay, well, guess what? Now I'm single again, and I have to
Right.
adhere to these principles, to this
Right.
lifestyle of, really, it's godliness. That's what it
Yeah.
is, just a
That's what
lifestyle of godliness. And I
Mhm.
think that the danger in, like, I grew up kind of in the purity movement, where it was like, don't have sex until you get married, or what did they used to say? Make sure that you stay pure. That's what it was. Make sure you stay pure until you get married. And I was like, actually, you need to stay pure all the way through. Like,
Right.
after you get married, you
Right.
need to stay pure, because that again is saying sex is not pure.
Right.
It's like, you
Exactly.
get married, now you don't have to worry about the purity thing.
Exactly.
And it's like,
Exactly. So that's where the whole dirty narrative comes in. It's from that. So we've got to words are very, very powerful. So if you're going to throw the word pure around and purity, you got to think, what is the opposite of that? So if you're
yeah,
telling me to stay pure, if I do slip up and have sex with somebody, I'm dirty. And then for how long am I dirty? And how do I redeem myself from that? And then you don't know how to unpack that when you're ready to be free with your husband, because you've been preached this purity culture. And so now that I am ready to be free, how do I do that?
right, right. And that's what, I think this podcast, that's the goal, is to help women to come out of those dead traditions and those lies and just misinformation, and know that, if you are a believer, like, Christ has purified you. And so, yes, we have a standard that we live under. And yes, you should be operating in the way that God's word says that you should be operating in. But again, operate that way the entire way through. That's when you get married, you still have to be careful about what you watch. I am a grown married woman, and I do not watch movies of people having sex. And I'm not just talking about porn. I'm
Right.
talking about, like, even like regular movies that you would go see in the movie theater. I'm not interested in that, because that is not keeping my marriage bed undefiled.
Right.
So I'm constantly thinking about, how do I make sure on my end that I'm not bringing anything into my marriage bed that is not of God? And so
Right.
we don't let go of the whole purity thing, just because we get married. We actually, I think, dial it up even more and
Mhm.
protect. And I think that as wives, we have a responsibility and a privilege to help our husbands. And this is kind of going back to that conversation of, like, how can you help your husband to stay pure?
Mhm.
Give him something good to look at, so his eyes
Right.
aren't roaming on wandering all over the place.
Exactly.
Now, that isn't, you're not responsible if his eyes roam, but give the man some help,
Absolutely.
a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why initiation on the wife's part is huge,
Yeah,
because you don't, like you said, you're not responsible if his eyes do roam, but you do have a level of responsibility to keep him engaged.
that's right.
I read something um, that was saying that how this is a man that's writing this. Um, sex every night should be the goal. So a man doesn't not desire to have sex. Like if you give him the opportunity, your husband wants to have sex with you every night. You know, if he's sick, tired, had a rough day, there are times where it just doesn't happen. But it was saying basically assume he wants to have sex every night. So
Mhm.
you've got to understand that their minds work differently, and I guess we can use the word needs if we want to. They have different needs, and I think understanding your body and your cycle as a woman. So another thing I wasn't taught about was ovulation, or just your cycle in general and your hormones. But as an adult, I found out just how much friskier I am when I'm ovulating, because your body wants to make a baby. So I would notice around the same time this month, I'm like, why do I really want to connect with my husband right now? It's because I'm ovulating. So as wives, we need to learn that. We need to learn our cycle, and we need to take advantage of those days. So my advice to a woman, to a wife who is learning how to initiate, start with those days when you really feel like it, because it might be scary, but your body is already telling you that you want that connection. So start there. But we don't know these things. Nobody taught me about ovulation and what happens.
Right. That's such great advice, Molly. Well, why don't you tell everybody who's listening how they can find you, how they can find your blog? Just tell us a little bit about how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so you can find my blog on my website, shapeyourfit.com. And I write about marriage, family, faith, fitness, a whole myriad of things. So I would love if you found my blog and subscribed there. I am on Instagram at Shape with Molly. I tweet. I'm an avid Twitter user. I love Twitter. It's like a whole different universe. So you can
It
find me
is.
on Twitter at the name is Molly. And as Dana said, I'm now on Clubhouse, and I'm kind of still getting used to that, but developing a small community there. And my handle there is the same as Twitter. The name is Molly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Molly, for being here. Thank you for what you shared today. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for having me.